Well, apparently we have reached a level of notoriety on Etsy that we now have people impersonating us on that side. So just as a heads up, if you see our art on any other part of Etsy besides etsy.com/shop/candydandyart, just know that it is a scam. And if you want to make sure that you get one of our original art pieces, head on over to etsy.com/shop/candydandyart, because that is the only place that you will be finding our original one-of-a-kind Candy Dandy pieces. Now on to our video. Are we recording? Hey, it's your dandy, Candy, and today we're going to be talking about Fallout. It feels like recently everyone has gotten a bit of that uranium fever for Fallout, well, with a lot of channels that usually talk about other subject matters doing a video to talk about, especially with that new Amazon series that just came out recently, which was so fucking good. I don't even want to hear it. That shit was magical, mother. You might notice that I have a little more twang to my voice this time just because I'm really excited about the subject and my throat is sore as fuck, so I really don't feel like covering up my accent. You're gonna have to excuse me, honey. So I figured that I would do just like everybody else is doing and hop on the bandwagon, Brahmin caravan, whatever, and we're gonna have a video talking about Fallout. Now, unless you've been stuck in a fridge for over 200 years, I'm sure you are well aware of what the franchise Fallout is. So we're not going to do an in-depth deep dive into all the Great War and all the lore and stuff like that. There are tons of channels on here that have been doing that for years that are phenomenal. I could absolutely recommend a few. TK Mantis, for example, Rad King. These are fantastic channels to learn about the history and the lore and all the background information about the Fallout franchise. Instead, what we're going to be doing is focusing on the stuff that we enjoy about the series, and maybe talk a little bit about the stuff we don't enjoy as well. That's mostly going to be the modern iteration, the Bethesda version of Fallout, because I haven't played 1, 2, or Tactics, and I'm definitely not playing that Brotherhood of Steel game because that's completely non-canon. So we're mostly going to be focusing on Fallout 4, Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, and the new TV series that just came out, which was absolutely incredible. Now, I will say this, however, that because we will be talking about the games specifically, Fallout 3, 4, New Vegas, and the TV show, we will be going into the plots and details of those games and shows. So if for somehow, some way, some reason you have not played those games yet, this is your first spoiler warning. Just letting you know, we're going to be spoiling that shit for you. And we're probably going to have a bit of game footage spliced in here too, just because, I like to play the games. It's mostly what I do when I'm not making art, when I'm not dressing up, when I'm not working, I'm playing Fallout. So we're going to have some footage in there. I'm not going to tell you how much because honestly, it's going to be a pain in the ass to edit that shit in. But if you're going to do if you're going to do a video talking about Fallout, you got to have some Fallout footage in there. You know what I'm saying? And with that out of the way, let's go and get it. Being a child of the 1980s in America meant that we grew up right at the end of the Cold War and were pretty much in full swing when it came to the propaganda of that Cold War. You had a lot of anti-Soviet propaganda out there, a lot of pro-US military stuff, and as well as the boogeyman of mutually assured destruction. Of course, with the Cold War having been gone on for over 30 years at this point, more of that propaganda came across as more fantastical than for real. And there was an equal amount of stuff lampooning and parodying those doomsday scenarios. And Fallout, if anything, is that. It is absolutely a critique and a parody of the extreme Cold War era paranoia and nuclear destruction that was so common in pop culture at that time period. It's a series that takes place in a visually idyllic 1950s, 1960s, future retro, world of tomorrow type landscape that was obliterated into an irradiated wasteland in less than 2 hours. More on that in a bit. Most of the games, aside from 76, take place about 200 years or so after the Great War, where society has collapsed into barbarism. That doesn't mean that it's being run by barbarians. It means that it's just collapsed into barbarism. That'd be a really good drag name, wouldn't it? Please welcome to the stage, Barbarism. Now sure, there are some factions like the NCR in the West who are trying to reestablish some sense of governance and order to the chaos. But for the most part, it's warring tribes fighting over whatever piece of scrap they can come across. You see signs of the pre-war world amongst the ruins. Rusted out mid-modern and Art Deco inspired bric-a-brac and detritus, propaganda posters threatening the Red Scare and patriotic messages about doing your part for Uncle Sam. litter the landscape alongside advertisements for Nuka-Cola, Red Rocket, Huber's Comics, and of course, Vault-Tec. But for most Wastelanders, it's just junk. Fragments from a world they never grew up in, who fucked it all up in the end. Sure, there's the occasional character who has a case of the old world blues, pining for a return to a romanticized concept of a time period they never grew up in or really don't know anything about. Much like you have nowadays. I see you over there in the suburbs with your chickens. I see you. Judging. But most Wastelanders are more preoccupied with living another day and avoiding things like giant insects, raiders, slavers, super mutants, feral ghouls, corrupted military-grade robots, and all sorts of abominations, some caused by the radiation, others as a direct result of pre-war military experiments. Vault dwellers aren't very popular in the Wasteland either, due largely to the ones from vaults who did fucked up experiments on their inhabitants, which was the original intent of the vaults that you can learn about through exploring them, but also because a lot of them lack the basic fundamentals to survive outside the vault, which makes them the perfect choice as a protagonist for the player to control and grow through, giving you fresh eyes to a world with no idea the horrors that you're about to see. A big part of what makes Fallout interesting is done through environmental storytelling.
Okay, human, make the machine stop recording now. Human, not time for sleep. Stop bleeding and work the machine. Fine. Hammer will fix it.
Coming across notes, terminal entries, or just taking in your surroundings allows you a broader picture of what the world was really like before the bombs fell, and where you learn it wasn't as idealistic as the pre-war propaganda painted it out to be. There was a global resource war that drained the planet dry, a plague that killed countless people, rampant automation causing record number job losses, astronomical levels of inflation, which I would have argued a few years ago was just outright comical, but taco 12 packs are $30 now at Taco Bell. So, food shortages nationwide, and a corrupt government more concerned with covering their own ass. It's got a very war is bad vibe to the game, obviously, because you're literally playing around in the fucking ruins of society, and people seem to miss that. But it's also got a very make do with what you got type mentality to the game, especially in 3 in New Vegas, where you're constantly having to repair things, take scraps apart, rebuild things, and also in 4, where you're actually doing shit like settlement building. But we'll get into that shit in a little bit, as well as a lot of anti-bourgeoisie sentiment to it. The main economy in the post-war is centered on the barter system and a currency consisting of bottle caps, aka useless junk that the water vendors decided on because they got tired of lugging water around everywhere as currency. And most of the wealthy characters pre-war and post-war in the series are egomaniacal, isolationist monsters who would pretty much kill anybody in sight if it meant a better view, a few more bottle caps, or a little more control. And a lot of fortune finders succumbing to some pretty grisly and sometimes comical fates because they let their greed blind them, whether it was over caps or trinkets or chems. It's a world you can really get lost in while exploring. That mirrors a lot of our own societal issues, and I'm always finding something new with each playthrough. The game gives you a lot of moral dilemmas. Some of them are a little more obvious than other ones, like whether or not to poison the water or purify the water. I mean, that's pretty much a no-brainer unless you're just being a dick. But the option for you to be the wasteland savior or its destroyer is entirely up to you, although to varying degrees depending on the game that you're playing. I also find the stark contrasts of the game to be very entertaining. You're walking around in this irradiated wasteland where you've got burnt out bodies, skeletal remains, broken bridges, cars that are just completely bricked because of a massive EMP pulse that happened when the bombs went off. And meanwhile, when you got all this shit going off, you got all these brightly colored, mid-modern, cartoony fucking advertisements for Nuka-Cola and Grey Tortoise cigarettes and all this other shit. While you got this really happy soundtrack of like 1930s to 50s music playing, you know, you're running away from some motherfucker with a fucking cap gun. You're running away from some motherfucker with a pipe gun. Meanwhile, you got this fucking song going, I got spurs that jingle, jangle, jingle. The whole fucking time that you're running away from this shit, there's an 8-foot tall lizard following you, running right behind your ass. And it's so behind. You know what I'm saying? It's got a lot of stark contrast, which makes it very entertaining. It gives it a comical sense to the sci-fi horror post-apocalyptic survivalism that you got going on to the game, and I find it very enjoyable. So how do we rank them? Well, of the ones I've played so far, which is again 3, 4, and New Vegas, I would have to go with New Vegas as my favorite one, Fallout 4 as my second favorite, and Fallout 3 as my least favorite. Now, I know that technically you wouldn't have Fallout New Vegas and Fallout 4 if it wasn't for Fallout 3 setting the groundwork for the 3D fucking sandbox shooter light game that they have. Shooter light RPG game. Because before then, it was just turnstile based combat. But just because it was the first one doesn't always make it the best. Now, don't get me wrong, Fallout 3 is a fun game, but I found the combat to be a hot mess. And of course, that's because I'm playing it on Xbox, which is like the worst version of it to play. But I found the combat to be a hot mess and the weapons and armor degradation system to be really annoying. Its main story is incredibly short, despite how long it takes Liam Neeson to finish a sentence.
Honey, I brought you into this world. I think you know the rest.
Which centers around you, a vault dweller, forced out of Vault 101 after your father fled to continue a project he had been working on with the Brotherhood of Steel called Project Purity. That would provide clean drinking water to the capital wasteland, which the Enclave, a fascist remnant of the old world government, run by President Eden, voiced by Malcolm McDowell, want to alter with a strain of FEV, or forced evolutionary virus, designed to exterminate anything mutated with radiation, which is pretty much everyone except them. The Broken Steel add-on was a nice addition to the main quest, allowing you to see the aftermath of your decisions in the main campaign, but I feel it's overshadowed by the Pit, which had a far more interesting story and a far more interesting environment to it. Like if the Pit was the main story for Fallout 3 rather than Waters of Life, I would probably rank it a little higher up there. But that being said, especially since it kind of felt a little bit like they borrowed some from what Black Isle originally wanted to do for their version of Fallout 3, which was Van Buren, where you were basically in a prison, you break out of the prison, they have the whole new plague thing going on. There's notes there that I'm picking up. And it kind of felt like they wasted a lot of potential having Malcolm McDowell play the voice of President Eden, only for him to just be a disembodied AI voice. I mean, this is the second time that he's shown up in some kind of post-apocalyptic story as an evil president with a plot revolving around water, and he didn't even get a cool holographic head or a mechanical arm or nothing this time around. Pow, 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 pow. Now, New Vegas. Motherfucking New Vegas. New Vegas feels like a polished version of what Fallout 3 was doing. And they did it in a much faster time frame as well. It still has the armor and weapons degradation that 3 had, but it feels, again, I'm not a technical person with this shit, so it feels like they somehow managed to tweak it just right so that it's not a massive pain in the ass to use, you know? They even added this faction clothing option, which they kind of did in 3 with the ghoul mask, but otherwise not so much. But in Fallout New Vegas, if you show up at an NCR camp dressed up in Brotherhood of Steel armor or Enclave armor, or you show up at a Legion campground dressed up as an NCR ranger, the people there immediately go aggravated towards you. They immediately go aggro towards you. It's kind of a neat little gimmick that they got going on for it that makes it a little more immersive and fun. The story for New Vegas centers around a courier that was shot in the head by Matthew Perry.
What in the goddamn?
Who then goes out on a rampage for revenge and ends up deciding the fate of the entire Mojave over a platinum gambling chip. The Mojave is a far more interesting setting, teeming with all sorts of dangerous wildlife like the coyote rattlesnake hybrid night stalkers, child-sized man-eating geckos and scorpions, death claws that have clearly gotten into the buff out, especially in the Divide region.
The Divide.
remnants of the Master's super mutant army and schizophrenic stealth boy addicted Nightkin, and the nightmare fuel to everyone's existence in the Mojave Wasteland, the Cazador. Being somewhat of a desert rat myself, having lived in the valley for over 20 years, I find it feels like home to me in a weird way to be playing in the Mojave Wasteland, even though I live in the Sonoran Desert. Not in the giant mutant tarantula hawks chasing me a mile down the road while I'm trying to escape a group of Roman LARPers dressed up in shitty little leather skirts and football gear, but more so in the American Southwest sort of way, which can be very harsh, especially during the hot months, which is most of the months, but also beautiful in its subtleties. You see the majesticness especially in the Honest Hearts add-on, which takes place in the mountainous Zion National Park in Utah. The endgame's choice feels more complex than 3, where you have to decide whether the Mojave should be run by the NCR, who by this point have exhausted their resources due to a battle at the Hoover Dam with the Brotherhood of Steel and Kaiser's Legion, and rely heavily on prison labor to keep things going with an imperialist president, Kimball, who's basically taken all the goodwill and effort that President Tandy had created for the NCR beforehand and turned them into a bunch of jackbooted thugs. Kaiser's Legion is the other option that you have, which relies entirely on slave labor and their leader, who has terminal brain cancer and is probably going to die in 5 years. That will more than likely devolve back into warring raider gangs in less than a decade once he dies. Mr. House, who is an autocrat in a can that claims he wants to send humanity into space, but really just wants to keep things going as they are with a more beefed up super robot army because, let's be honest, ain't no money in space. Or freeing New Vegas in the Mojave, leaving the fate up to its inhabitants for good or bad. You know, it amazes me how a video game managed to do a better story about a post-apocalyptic mailman than Kevin Costner could, but somehow Black Isle found a way.
Hey, this is Editing Candy, and you can probably tell that my voice sounds even worse. That's because I feel even worse. I just wanted to point out that I made a mistake here, and that the company that made Fallout New Vegas was Obsidian Entertainment and not Black Isle Studios. Obsidian Entertainment came about the end of Black Isle Studios. It's pretty much the same people that started it, but Black Isle Studios was the ones that created Fallout 1 and 2, and Obsidian did New Vegas. So I thought I would go ahead and correct that rather than be like Jeremy and just leave shit in without correcting things. Anyway, back to the video.
In fact, the only real gripe I have for Fallout New Vegas is the lack of Elvis Presley songs on the playlist. Now, they do have an entire gang in New Vegas called the Kings, who are Elvis impersonators, but not a single Elvis Presley song on the playlist at all. There was word that they were going to do a cover of Love Me Tender, but they decided against it. And I wasn't 100% sure if it was because maybe the music rights to Elvis's stuff was caught up with the Church of Scientology, because Priscilla and Lisa Marie were both members and they don't really like their in-game parody, the Hubologists. But I'm not 100% sure if that was the case or not. But as someone from Memphis who is a bit of a Elvis fan, and knowing Elvis's connection to Las Vegas, it seems like it was just that one little cherry on top that would have just made this as just an absolute platinum masterpiece. You know what I'm saying? It's just a personal gripe. Now, 4 is the first one I ever played, and it has a special place in my heart because of that. The combat has been overhauled completely and is a very enjoyable experience, with a bash option for firearms now being added to the game, as well as power attack moves for blunted, bladed, and unarmed weapons. Now, the weapons and armor degradation system is gone in Fallout 4, and honestly, it's fine. It sucked in 3. It was great in New Vegas. It felt balanced in New Vegas. It wasn't really needed in 4. And you now have the option of upgrading things based on your special stats and your skill levels, rather than having to get like a formula or a recipe to build something. They also made the consumables like books and magazine issues one single magazine, rather than constantly having to collect them, and those benefits just being, those buffs just being very temporary. Now when you get a magazine, you get that buff permanently. It's kind of neat. It is definitely more of a collector-centric game than the other ones are. The Commonwealth is a lush environment to explore, with a good balance of rural and metropolitan and irradiated zones. And the graphics have definitely improved given the time between games, which I know some people will say that graphics are not everything, and I understand that. But the improved graphics definitely make the world feel more lived in and less like you're bashing action figures in a toy box. The story is interesting enough, with it centering around either Nate or Nora, a Army veteran and lawyer respectively, who were cryogenically frozen in Vault 111 for a little over 210 years.
It will take a little for the Earth's rotation and some minor dings to the old chronometer.
As they head out into the Commonwealth to find their newborn son Sean and avenge their dead spouse who was kidnapped by the Institute, only to discover he's now an old man and running it by the time you finally find him, and dying of cancer, which makes your reunion with him very short-lived since he doesn't survive past the game, no matter which faction you choose. And you have to choose a faction. There's no non-faction option. It's kind of disappointing. This is part of the problems with it, is that it's very puts you in a box type game, where you don't have a lot of creative decision in that regard. It would have been cool to see things like maybe a raider option or a gunner's option, or maybe even have one of the major settlements be willing to go up against the Institute. But it felt like the groundwork was there. It felt like the stuff was there to set that shit up. It just didn't play out. Instead, your options are the Minutemen, who are basically non-existent when you show up and can barely handle themselves against raiders, gunners, and infighting. The Railroad, who are hardcore in their mission to free synths from the Institute, but have little to no interest in the rest of the Commonwealth, which they view as closed-minded bigots, and will even have you go out on assassination missions once the main story's ended to take out settlements and individual characters in-game that are intolerant towards synths. The Brotherhood of Steel, who are just there for technology and to wipe the map with super mutants, ghouls, and synths, run by a fanatical Elder Maxon, who is a far cry from the previous game's Elder Lions and their Lion's Pride, who is by far my personal favorite chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel. Or the Institute, who is the only official bad guy faction of the game, that basically views the Commonwealth as a testing ground for their FEV and synth experiments and views its inhabitants as guinea pigs. The big gimmick to 4 is settlement building, which is a nice addition to the game, and I see that they've also added it into 76, and I hope they continue it into the other games too. I don't really plan on ever playing 76, mainly because of the mainly because of the always online multiplayer aspect of it. I enjoy playing the game single player, and I don't want to have a constant internet connection. But it's nice that that's an option. I think it's cool that they added to it. It's also the first game of the modern iteration of the franchise that has New Game Plus without needing an add-on to do that, and no level cap. So once the main story has been finished, you can continue on with whatever you wanted to do in the Wasteland, building things, blowing shit up. The only real difference is occasionally is a few faction-based Radiant quests and some flags and NPCs in the middle of Diamond City, and that's just about the only real impact that your decisions have in the game. And one of the things I definitely don't like about 4 is that it feels way more restrictive in its choices than options that it gives you, because it very much wants you to go a certain way, and there are very few options for you to actually be a bad guy player in this game. Now, I also know that there's folks who don't like that the player character is an already existing character with a background. It makes it hard to roleplay for some people, especially when the protagonist has a voice. But personally, I don't fucking care. It really doesn't affect my feelings about the game. It's kind of annoying, and it barely ever gets brought up except for 1 or 2 situations. But for the most part, you can just ignore the backstory. And in fact, if you actually go through the Institute terminals, there's stuff that's in those terminals that hints that you're not even actually Nate or Nora and actually a synth that replaced them. But you have to go looking through there to find that out. It's also further established in Far Harbor when one of the characters, I can't remember his fucking name, where an evil Nick Valentine asks you if you are in fact a synth outright. I'm going to call him Evil Nick Valentine. If you play the game, you know why. And speaking of add-ons, they are definitely a must-have for these games, with each installment adding new quests and additional flavor to the respective titles, taking you to new parts of the Wasteland and beyond, some stranger than others. My personal favorites being Old World Blues, Honest Hearts, The Lonesome Road, The Pit, Broken Steel, Mothership Zeta, Nuka World, and Far Harbor, in no particular order. And as for the show, Oh my god, I fucking love that show. Spoilers. Again, spoilers. If you haven't seen the show, spoilers. Oh, you're still here? The show centers around Lucy, the overseer's daughter, who is part of a triad-connected vault system consisting of vaults 31, 32, and 33, who flees her vault to find her father, who was kidnapped by a gang of raiders that infiltrated the vault disguised as residents of Vault 32 on her wedding night. Over the course of 8 episodes, she gets a crash course on survivalism, having to run across slavers, organ harvesting Mr. Handies, a giant oxalotl gulper, and a gunslinging ghoul who was a famous actor and spokesman for Vault Tech in the pre-war until he found out what they were really up to with the vaults. The series is set after the events of 3-4 in New Vegas around the year 2296, which is the furthest they've explored in the post-war Fallout franchise universe so far, and is centered around the Los Angeles area of California, aka the Boneyard. Now, I know some folks have been trying to drum up controversy, claiming that this show retconned the events of New Vegas because it establishes that Lucy's father, again, spoilers, Hank, blows up Shady Sands in 2277, which took place just a few years before the events of Fallout New Vegas happened. But it really doesn't. If anything, the creators of this show left a ton of Easter eggs for New Vegas in it. All the way from the various Sunset Sarsaparilla advertisements and trucks that you see littering the wasteland, the ghoul having a bandolier of custom shotgun ammunition, which is prominent in the New Vegas series, as well as a straight up fucking cameo from Robert fucking House and a representative from Big Mountain at the finale of the series, not to mention the place that Hank ended up at the end of the series. I'll tell you right now, that sure as fuck wasn't Kansas, Toto. I mean, I'm pretty damn sure that the majority of the second season is going to be taking place in New Vegas, where we'll actually finally see the aftermath of the canonical events of what happened there. If anything, I do hope that they at least get Danny Trejo to come back as Raul, because that would be fucking amazing, seeing Walton Goggins going up against Raul in a cowboy off. And if people still honestly believe that this show somehow completely retconned the entirety of New Vegas, they either didn't watch the show or they were watching it with a blindfold on, because it was so blatantly in your face that it could have just, it's right up in your face. I don't know how you could have missed that shit. And then there's those people that are like being real fucking gross, like photoshopping Lucy with like a shiny ass and shit. Like, I understand people have horny mods on their games. I get that. We don't need the horny mods in the fucking show, okay? That's really gross for you to be photoshopping someone's ass like that. The show is an absolute love letter to the franchise, and you can just tell from the props to the scenery to the outfits to the attention to detail that they went through, that they clearly are a fan of the series and know their shit. And in all honesty, I kind of knew that was going to be the case. I was really excited when they first announced this, because these are the same people that made the TV show Westworld for HBO. And the first thing I said when I saw that show, which by the way, also absolutely phenomenal. If you haven't seen Westworld, go watch Westworld. But the first thing I saw when I saw that show was the way that they made the robots in it looked exactly like how they make the synths in Fallout 4, down to their brains looking like synth components. So I was like, oh shit, these people play Fallout. So needless to say, I was very hyped about them being the ones to make this show, because they clearly loved the franchise and they knew what they were doing. This is by far the most true to the source material I have ever seen of a video game adaptation, ever. Nothing has gotten as close to the series and hit the things that made the show, that made the game so good and so enjoyable and built this huge passionate fan base over than that show did right there. It was absolutely phenomenal. It was made for the fans and it was made by the fans, and you can clearly tell there was a lot of love put into that show, and I'm personally looking forward to season 2. I really am. I'm so damn hyped for that shit, especially since it's going to be a long ass time before Fallout 5 comes out. I mean, I got my places I'd love to see it at. Like, I'd love to see it maybe in Hawaii, maybe in Memphis. I know that there's a lot of other people that are hype about that idea, seeing like the pyramid being turned into a settlement and shit. Graceland with like a bunch of turrets and shit. That'd be kind of cool. So who knows where the franchise will be taken from there. But there is one thing for certain about Fallout. No matter where it is, one thing stays the same, and that's war. War never changes. Anyway, if you like this hot mess of a video, you know the dealio. And if you want to check out some of my art, go on and head over to Etsy. Go on and head over to my Etsy shop, etsy.com/shop/candydandyart. There isn't any Fallout related stuff on there right now, but I am certainly tempted to whip something up. Anyways, this has been Candy Dandy. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a good one. I didn't say start recording again. Stop. Please welcome to the stage, Barbarism. Have a midlife crisis if you don't even have a life. We're gonna talk about my dreaded boogeyman of Merchully. Little too Memphis there. Pro USA, Star Spangled Banner, anti-commie stuff. A lot of channels that usually cover. You hear the air conditioner? That's not my fault. That's the air conditioner's fault. And it's hot as shit, so I ain't gonna complain about it. It's time to crawl out through that Fallout. Who I fondly refer to as Walton Googans. I've done that thing 5 times. That's as best as we're gonna get it. And you have to choose a faction in this game. Legit bad guy franchise or bad guy fraction. Just to get revenge on this checkered suit son of a bitch are egomaniacal isolationist monsters. Can't do that with a draw. Their greed, because they let their greed blind them, whether it was over a physical item like a teddy bear or a hat. Okay. Anyway, if you like this horribly not rehearsed hot mess that I just made here, you know what to do. That was crap.
What in the goddamn?
Hey, sexy lady. Looking for a good time? Tear you up!
None may enter without Caesar's permission.
I felt the ground shake a while ago. I'll take that as a sign you've got the job done.
Suits are good times. Thinking about that just blows my top.
And are those penises I see wriggling on its feet? Disgusting.
You out!
Made a good team.
The best. See you soon.